Hello, and welcome back to my channel, Talented Reads. In today's video, I'm going to be talking about all of the books that I read in October. I read a total of 20 books and a total of 5,856 pages. My average rating was 3.7. I read one ebook and 19 physical books. For star ratings, I had 2 5 stars, 1 4.5 stars, 6 4 stars, 6 3.5 stars, and 5 3-star books. I read 6 new releases. These are books that came out this year. 2 not so new releases, which are books that came out last year. 11 backlist books, which are books that came out 2020 or prior, and 1 ARC, which stands for Advanced Reader Copies, which are books for coming out later this year. All right, let's get into all the books. So I'm doing a horror challenge, and if you're been with my channel, you recognize this horror challenge. But the challenge is that I read a group of books associated with a specific subgenre of horror. I will do a dedicated horror wrap-up video that's coming later this week or next week. Anyways, it's the next video. So let's just talk through those books really quick here. Something Wicked This Way Comes by Ray Bradbury. Cooler and Dark's Pandemonium Shadow Show has come to Greentown, Illinois. Though the town is feeding into the carnival's hypnotic power, 2 boys will uncover its dark secrets. Rebecca by Daphne du Maurier. The newly married Mrs. De Winter arrives at the Manderley, feeling out of her element, and the ghost of Rebecca still remains. The Picture of Dorian Gray by Oscar Wilde. Let me read the synopsis to you. Oscar Wilde's only novel is the dreamlike story of a young man who sells his soul for eternal youth and beauty. I mean, does that not sound good or what? The Raven by Edgar Allan Poe. This is a large collection of Edgar Allan Poe's tales and poems. And Anoka by Shane Hawk. I'm going to read the synopsis for this one as well. Welcome to Anoka, Minnesota, a small city just outside of the Twin Cities, dubbed the Halloween capital of the world since 1937. Here before you lie several tales involving bone collectors, pagan witches, werewolves, skeletal bison, and clone children. But it's up to you to decipher between fact and fiction as the author has woven historical facts into his narratives. All right, let's get through the rest of the books. So I read 1 ARC this month. The Witch in the Well by Camilla Bruce. I want to be careful about not giving anything away, so I'm actually going to read the synopsis for this one too. Centuries ago, young Elizabeth Clark was accused of witchcraft after several children disappeared. Her acquittal did nothing to stop her fellow townsfolk from drowning her in the well where the missing children were last seen. Now, when 2 former friends reunite after decades apart, their grudges, flawed ambitions, and shared obsession swirl into an all-too-real echo of a terrible town legend. So I thought this one wasn't bad. It certainly wasn't a favorite. There are multiple point of views in the book, which mainly are the 2 childhood friends, Elena and Catherine. Catherine's point of view is like more of the future looking into the past. Elena's point of view is like the semi-past, and then there's actually a third point of view who I won't tell you who that is because you should discover it yourself, which is like the past looking into the future. So it's kind of a weird mix of point of views and timelines. And I wasn't particularly engaged to the fullest with any of the point of views, which obviously made it hard to kind of get into the story. I will say that a majority of this is set at a castle that Elena is staying at, and then, you know, the dark woods that plays a big important part is kind of behind her. So I very much enjoyed the atmosphere of that in this book. And there is a little supernatural element that's kind of woven into the story, which I also enjoyed. I would say my biggest gripe is actually the feud between Elena and Catherine. I mean, it's like two grown-ass women acting like children. It just really, like, takes you out of the story. And it's all over a book. Like, do we realize realistically how many books get published that are around the same subject? I mean, come on. And Catherine kind of gets into some deep trouble, though I won't say how, but she is warned to stay off social media. And on more than one occasion, in her point of view, she's like, I know they told me to stay away, but I feel like I have to say this. Like, no, you freaking don't. Like, just stay off social media, woman. Jeez. But all in all, I would probably recommend this to somebody who is looking for a light horror book that's got a mystery, but not really a detective-focused mystery. And thank you to NetGalley and Tor Books for the art. I read a couple of short story and anthologies this month. Ghostwritten by Ronald Malfi. This is a collection of 4 novellas that are set in a shared universe, which is kind of all about deadly books. And in true Ronald Malfi fashion, they were creepy as hell. Each novella I thought was better than the previous one. And the last novella, actually called The Story, was my favorite of the 4. And I also liked that in the back of the book, Ronald's notes kind of talks about how each novella made references to each other, which I did catch on while reading the book, which I thought was very cool. And he also said that there were references kind of in there to his other works, which I didn't quite catch, but I still thought it was cool that he did that. So, you know, I gave this one a pretty good rating, and I'm happy to have another favorite Malfi on my bookshelves. The Gathering Dark, edited by Tori Bovalino. This is an anthology of folk horror. There's a total of 10 stories. Quite a few young adult authors that I've read from before. My favorite stories are Loved by All Save One, which is by Tori Bovalino herself. The Tallest Poppy by Chloe Dawn. And Third Burn by Courtney Gold. You know, those were my favorites. There were some that I didn't like. So, you know, by the time you average them all out, it was an okay read. And the last anthology is Toil and Trouble, which is edited by Tess Sharp and Jessica Spotswood. This is an anthology of women in witchcraft. There's a total of 15 stories. Again, quite a few young adult authors I've read from before, and I actually have read this particular anthology before. I read it for the first time last October, but wanted to do a reread for the October Challenge prompt. I had some pretty surprising results too. Like a few of these I know I gave 5 stars last time, but this time around, like, I only gave it 3 stars, which was surprising. My favorites are The One Who Stayed by Nova Ren Suma, Daughters of Baba Yaga by Brenna Yovanov, The Heart in Her Hands by Tess Sharp, Death in Her Sawtooths by Lindsay Smith, The Legend of Stone Mary by Robin Talley, and The Well Witch by Kate Hart. I read one nonfiction this month, which was The Six Women of Salem by Marilyn K. Roach. This is the untold story of the accused and their accusers in the Salem witch trials. The 6 women discussed in this book are Rebecca Nurse, Bridget Bishop, Mary English, Ann Putnam Sr., Mary Warren, and I think it's Tituba. This book is divided into 3 parts. The first part being kind of an introduction to all 6 women. The second part is the timeline of the events as they occurred. And then the third part is kind of like a follow-up and what happened afterward. I thought the book was well-crafted, and it's obvious that Marilyn Roach has done massive research and knows her stuff about the subject. However, I wish the information was told differently. I thought the material was kind of dry, and it kind of felt, I don't know, like a disservice to the accused. But I did like that she included pictures and stuff. It kind of really brought this, the whole thing to life, and you're reading it and you just can't fathom, like, that this was actually a time in our history. But, yeah, it was lots of really good information. I've heard of all of these women before, so it was nice to be able to kind of learn more about them. Alrighty. Let's chat through the remaining books. Thistlefoot by Jenna Rose Nethercott. Siblings Bellatine and Isaac were estranged, but brought together when they learned that they have inherited a sentient house on Chicken Legs called Thistlefoot. The siblings end up battling a figure called the Long Shadow Man. This was just okay. There is a lot of culture and lore immersed in the story, which I did enjoy, but I felt like there was a lot of little storylines kind of happening at the same time, as well as this kind of point of view shift between like the past, which of course has its own storyline. So it just seemed like there was a lot going on, and some of the storylines kind of just, I don't know, felt very unnecessary. This is Jenna Rose's debut, and I would certainly pick something up from her in the future. The Hive by Greg Olson. Officer Lindsay Jackman is called to the scene of a crime in which they find a young journalist girl from a local college found at the bottom of a ravine. Her investigation leads her to learn about Marnie and her followers who call themselves the Hive. This was just another okay read for me. I thought it started out interesting, but on the police side of things, the main officer, like, she interviewed a lot of freaking people, which, like, I get is probably something that would actually happen, but it just really dragged the story on more than necessary. And quite honestly, we ended up learning like more in between the chapters with the interviews than we did with her actually interviewing the people. So that just made it feel even more unnecessary. And I would say this is a cult book, although it's very clear that they don't really call themselves a cult, which I thought was interesting. And bottom line is, I was secretly hoping for a totally different kind of ending, which of course fell a little short for the way the narrative was going. So that was a little disappointing. The Last Final Girl by Stephen Graham Jones. As the synopsis says, life in a slasher film is easy. You just have to know when to die. So yeah, another just okay book. This one was interesting because it was kind of written in a slasher film format, like more like a script. Which I don't know if I liked that style for the story. It was a little distracting at times. But I would say this book is really just about like fighting to become the last final girl. And the main character is really into slasher films. So she kind of like, you know, like stuff that's happening in her town. She's like, oh yeah, you know, in a slasher film, like this happens, and this is the culprit. And, you know, she like kind of calls all that out, which was kind of interesting, but at the same time with it reading like a slasher film, you're like, is this really happening or what? Like it was kind of hard to distinguish what exactly was happening. And of course, these are high school kids, so it was a little over the top with the high school stuff. It was stupid jokes, stupid references. I didn't care for the characters and the drama, and I just was over a lot of that. So, yeah. Comfort Me with Apples by Catherine M. Valente. Sophia lives in a perfect neighborhood called Arcadia Gardens, and she loves her husband. He is perfect for her, and she is perfect for him. And everything feels perfect. But is it? That's all I'll say, because this was kind of a short read. We follow the point of view of Sophia as she kind of uncovers something disturbing that really spirals her into second-guessing her perfect life. This took a direction that, to be honest with you, I was totally not expecting, though not as dark as I was hoping for. But yeah, this did catch me off guard. Yeah. We Can Never Leave This Place by Eric LaRocca. We follow the perspective of Mara, who, after her father's death, now lives alone with her mother. After her mother invites a stranger into their home, Mara knows she's the only one that can truly protect herself. So in true LaRocca fashion, this was a weird freaking book. And I think it has more of a psychological element than that really popular book that he had last year. I think it's called Things Have Gotten Worse Since We Last Spoke, or whatever. I actually preferred that book over this one. Though I would still recommend this book to people who have read his work. I think Eric just has this great ability to write very real, horrific themes kind of amongst this weird storyline. You know, this book has a lot of loneliness in it, grief, dealing with trauma, You know, a lot of those things are kind of like an undertone into all the other things that these characters are dealing with. Also, I would say if you liked the way that the other book was written, as far as it being like a chat room kind of thing, this is written more in the standard novel form. So if you liked that about his other book, obviously you're not going to get that this time around. But I would still recommend checking it out. Anybody Home by Michael J. Sullinger? I feel like I could have read that until I actually tried to pronounce it. So reading the one-line synopsis that says, what came first, the home or the desire to invade? Honestly, that's all I'm going to give you. This is definitely a book I would recommend to going in as blind as you can. The events that unfold, like, there's no preparing for. I was kind of afraid to read this at first because I heard it was a very intense book. And though it is more intense than like your traditional creepy read, it was actually not as intense as I was expecting. It is ultimately about a home invasion story, but it is written as though you are the invader, which was such an interesting way to do it. And I think that honestly upped the creepy factor because you are kind of thrown into it and partaking in this horrific thing that's happening. There are no names in the book. It's like victim 1, victim 2, etc. Same with the invaders. And again, such a smart move because it forced you to kind of focus on the real crime rather than trying to make it personal, although it's hard not to feel for the victims. Yeah. The Rats by James Herbert. This is about rats. Well, rats with a taste for human flesh. And as you can imagine, shit hits the fan real fast. I enjoyed this. It had all of the things that I wanted in a book about flesh-eating rats. Such vivid descriptions. Like, I could easily imagine all the little paws crawling on me throughout the book, which just gave me the chills. And I will say I will never look at rats the same. This is the first book in a series. I think there's like 3 or 4 in the series. I won't be continuing. It did kind of leave somewhat of an open ending, but I was completely satisfied with that. I didn't really feel a burning desire to, see what else could happen. So, yeah. The Botanist by L.K. Hill. Detective Cody Oliver is the lead on a case where they uncover a mass grave in the desolate hills of Utah. A grave where bodies have been buried and fertilized for flowers. Thus, the media dubs the serial killer the Botanist. I really enjoyed this. It starts off with a bang. And there's kind of 2 mysteries happening side by side, which at first I was feeling like one wasn't really needed. But as the book progresses on, I found myself really interested and invested in kind of both of the mysteries. And when it all comes to a head, dang, those mysteries. The author did such a great job kind of like colliding them together and having them kind of all work out. I will say I wasn't sold on a lot of the characters, but I thought the plot was interesting enough and there was enough like action happening in the book that I didn't really feel bored being around those characters that I didn't really care for. Road of Bones by Christopher Golden. So this book is actually based on a real place and real historical event. So let me kind of read you about that, and I'll open with that first. When the Soviets discovered gold and uranium deposits, Stalin wanted to build a road between Magadan and Utsk. At least 80 new camps were constructed along the route to supply a readily available workforce. Political prisoners, criminals, unfortunate innocents, even men who'd look at the wives of Soviet officials, they all fed the gulags. Hundreds of thousands were put to work building the Koloma Highway. Over the years, as many as 600,000 people died while constructing the road, most by freezing to death. Their bodies were buried where they fell, plowed under the permafrost, thus giving way to its name, the Road of Bones. And in the winter, this 1,200-mile stretch of road has temperatures that drop as low as 60 degrees below zero. This book follows Felix, or Ted, and his friend as they decide to shoot a documentary film. But they get more than they bargained for, and thus begins a night for their survival. So I have to say, I loved this book. I thought the weave with history was such a good move, and I read this at night, and reading it during the cold season is honestly the only way people should be reading this book. The author did such a great job describing the cold in such a way that you could feel it in your bones, and just the darkness and the dread, and just, you know what's coming. Like, you can't survive outside of the vehicle. Like, just that panic that comes with that, and just, I mean, you know you're here in the dark, and you gotta wait until the sun comes up again. I mean, it was a book of existential dread, but it very well written, and again, gotta love that fear the darkness trope. So good. And lastly is Dracula by Bram Stoker. Jonathan Harker visits Transylvania to help Count Dracula purchase a London house, and ends up uncovering a few frightening things. I mean, what's left to say about Dracula? This was my first introduction to vampires, and Dracula, to this day, remains one of my all-time favorite books. I used to read it every year, but it had been some years, so I decided to reread it this year, and so glad that I did. The descriptions in the book, and just the interactions that the characters have with each other, and the atmosphere, and just this kind of constant feeling of dread throughout the book. And I love that it's, written in these diary chapters, and Dracula himself kind of is this mystery of a man, but yet almost kind, and just this troubled soul, and I love it. So if you've never read Dracula at this point, I highly recommend giving it a try. All right, so that's it for all the books. This month I did do an October reading challenge with my two besties, and we did a bingo board. I did a vlog reading for the challenge. I'll link that video in the description box if you'd like to check it out. But I said multiple times that I was trying to do a blackout, even though I cut the vlog off once I got a bingo. So let's check out my final bingo board. Oh, I was so close. I got to the point at the end of the month where I was like, in order to finish this, I need to read like 7 books today. And, it just wasn't feasible. So instead of reading, I just decided not to do anything. Yeah. But I had a couple of purple ones that I could have easily knocked out of the way, but That's okay. It's always next year. Okay, so that's all I have for this video. Drop a comment below and let me know how your October reading went. What was your favorite book of the month? Did you get through all the spooky books that you had planned? Thanks for stopping by, and I'll see you in my next video. Bye.